On June 12 of 1997, Batman and Robin came out in theaters. Directed by Joel Schumacher and written by Akiva Goldsman, Warner Bros. Was expecting the film to be as successful or even more successful than its predecessor, Batman Forever, which released to high financial numbers but received mediocre critical reception.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
Joel Schumacher wasn't looking to make a Batman film with an ounce of depth or complexity that a lot of fans had come to expect out of the character. Instead, his sole and only goal was to make a Batman film that was fun and enjoyable for the whole family to watch. Schumacher's Batman was a direct response and contrast to what Tim Burton did with Batman Returns, which was highly criticized for being too dark for a movie aimed at kids. Schumacher's approach to Batman, although noble, was exactly the reason why Batman and Robin was both a critical and financial failure. The film's camp, its lazy and sensational writing, coupled with its over-the-top visuals and performances, just didn't sit well with many audiences. The film was basically one big advertisement for consumer products, masquerading as a movie.
Hi, Freeze. I'm Batman.
All Joel Schumacher did was embrace the weird, wacky, and fun side of Batman that was prevalent in the Silver Age era of comics for years. The fact of the matter is that making Batman fun and lighthearted has what I call a built-in audience limit. There's a limited amount of times you can keep Batman a campy and lighthearted character before the audiences become tired of it. When it comes to the comics, the lighthearted approach to Batman, although successful for a couple years, started seeing a rapid decline in sales later on. That was until writer and publicist Dennis O'Neil returned Batman to his dark roots that defined his character for years. Stories that explored his pain, fear, mental instability, and his emotional and physical journey that comes with being Batman. Batman was originally envisioned as a dark and brooding character. He was snapping people's necks without mercy, he was carrying guns around and using them when he saw it as necessary, and he was pushing people into acid tanks, believing they deserved it, and he was threatening to kill people if they didn't give him the information he wanted. It was about time for Batman to be taken more seriously on the big screen. It was undeniably clear at this point that dark and more serious Batman stories were the way to go, as they generated more fan interest. After Batman and Robin was sent to the gulag of terrible studio productions, Warner Bros. Decided to put the Batman franchise on ice as they re-evaluated their entire approach. At this stage, many directors approached Warner Bros. With their own ideas to continue the franchise. Joel Schumacher returned and pitched a continuation to Batman and Robin titled Batman Triumphant, which sought to be more darker and more serious than his previous Batman films. Joss Whedon also pitched a Batman film to Warner Bros. The film was set to be more Bruce Wayne-centric than the Batman movies before it. Unfortunately, that didn't sit well with the executives, who basically laughed him out of the room. Probably one of the most interesting pitches was by Darren Aronofsky, who sought to ground Batman in a dark noir and gritty world. His R-rated, bleak, and radically different approach to Batman's mythos gave the studio cold feet. It was around this time that a young filmmaker known as Christopher Nolan became interested in the franchise. Nolan, like a lot of creatives at the time, had grown up with Batman when he was younger, and he was a big fan of the character. Hot off the success of his 2002 film Insomnia, Nolan took interest in directing a Batman film as he saw it as an opportunity to tell a Batman story that had never been told on film before. To tell a grounded and serious Batman story that explored his origins, but to also add his own creative spin that forever redefined the character as a whole. To do this, Nolan had to completely reboot the Batman franchise, so he wouldn't have to worry about following the previous film's continuity or world. This would be one of the first times a major franchise had been completely wiped of its past material. When crafting his version of Batman, Nolan decided to ground his version in what he called a cinematic reality, which basically means that he sought to take a fantastical character like Batman and place him inside a world that wasn't too far removed from our own. The purpose of this was to make each event feel believable and that it could actually happen in our world. This was completely different to Batman films of old, whose worlds felt more detached and alien, like they existed in a world where society's standards of what's normal was completely skewed and twisted. A lot of Batman stories already existed within grounded worlds, such as Batman Year One and some early Golden Age comics. It's just that Nolan was the first director to translate that groundedness into film and in some ways, take it to the next level. Since Nolan's Batman existed within a form of a grounded reality, he had to find a way to ground some aspects of Batman's mythos in order for them to make sense. Aspects such as his characters, suit, gadgets, and backstory. Chris Nolan screen tested many young and talented actors such as Ian Bailey, Cillian Murphy, Heath Ledger, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Henry Cavill. However, it was Christian Bale who brought the weight and gravitas that he was looking for. His performance as Batman exuded the energy that no other actor had. Bale achieved this by radically changing the tone of his voice while he was Batman.
Who was Falcone at the docks?
I don't know, I swear to God.
Swear to me.
Within a grounded world, it makes sense for Bruce to change his voice when he becomes Batman, especially considering how popular and well-known Bruce Wayne is. Now to be clear, Christian Bale wasn't the first one to invent the concept of Bruce Wayne changing his voice as Batman, as Kevin Conroy did it first in Batman the Animated Series.
Appreciate the help, Doc. I'll return the favor next time you're raising funds. Bye-bye.
This computer checked that fiber against every animal species known to man.
Another change Nolan made in Batman's mythos was his origin story. According to Nolan, there wasn't much Batman stories that filled in the gaps between when Bruce Wayne's parents were shot and when he became Batman. The only story I can recall that did that at the time was the Dennis O'Neil comic, Batman, The Man Who Falls. That story detailed Bruce's worldwide journey and how he learned from countless different masters with a mastery of different skills. The reason why he embarked on this journey was because to him, working outside the law was the best and most efficient way to fight crime. Becoming Batman wasn't something that came to him easily or even naturally. He had no sense of direction or a clear path to follow, only a vague understanding of his mission. A mission that ended in failure on his first night of crime fighting. It took a bat crashing through his window for him to finally take on the mantle of Batman. In Batman Begins, Bruce traveled the world not to train, but to understand the criminal mind. Unfortunately, Bruce's knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time got him locked up in a Chinese prison. Unlike the comic version, Nolan's Batman was only trained by the League of Shadows, learning the art of deception and theatricality. Unlike the comic version, whose crusade was ignited by a false sign from his father, a justification for his everlasting war on crime, Bruce Wayne from Batman Begins used the bat as inspiration for the idea that was already being concocted within his head. What does Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher's Batman have in common? Well, they all seem to neglect to mention where Batman gets all his gadgets from. Who built the Batmobile? Who makes the Batsuits? How did Bruce Wayne build a slide to the Batcave in absolute secrecy? None of these films ever explain or even mention the origins of his gear. Why? Because they didn't have to explain. These films prioritize style and visual aesthetics over practicality and logic. These stories did not exist in grounded worlds, and thus, grounded logic cannot and should not be applied to them. In the comics, there was no real explanation for where Batman got his gadgets and gear from, and thus, it can be inferred that he made most of his gear by himself. His Batsuits were most of the time skin-tight fabrics, so it's reasonable to think that him or Alfred tailored them. For the Batmobile, it was already established around 1950 that Bruce Wayne built and assembled the Batmobile himself. In the 1990s comic series Batman Prey, it was clearly shown that Bruce Wayne was in the midst of building the Batmobile using his knowledge in engineering. In Batman the Animated Series, a mechanic named Earl Cooper was responsible for designing, building, and repairing the Batmobile. However, besides a few stories, there really was no definitive explanation in the comics for where Batman got most of his gadgets and gear from. And that's the problem Nolan tried to address. In Batman Begins, a majority of Batman's gadgets were pre-existing gear from the Applied Sciences Department of Wayne Enterprises, a department which was being run by Lucius Fox, a character that was underutilized in the comics but was brought to the forefront in Nolan's retelling. Almost all the gear were designed and created for a failed military project. Things like the Kevlar bi-weave body armor, the gas-powered grapple gun, Kevlar utility harness, and memory cloth were all repurposed and altered by Bruce Wayne. As for the Tumbler, at the time of developing Batman Begins, Chris Nolan didn't know how to incorporate the Batmobile into the film, as he had no intention of even adding it to begin with. However, thanks to the help of David Goyer and production designer Nathan Crowley, Nolan was able to come up with an incredibly unique and grounded design for the Batmobile. It was armored, fast, and surprisingly agile for its large size. In Batman Begins, Nolan wanted the action to feel more grounded and grubby, for the punches to be felt and for the audience to feel how violent the action was. To him, a lot of action in films had no threat or impact. It had gotten to the point where fight scenes were more like choreographed dances than actual brawls. To avoid this issue, the stunt team strived to rid the action of any unnecessary movements whose only purpose was to make the fight scenes flashier to look at.
If Batman's got someone behind him and he can turn around and knock him out, headbutt him, why not? Why do a triple spin kick, double loop, why not just knock him out?
The stunt team wanted Batman's fight scenes to feel visceral and raw, for Batman's punches to feel like a raging bull striking you at full force. That's exactly why the stunt team incorporated a new fighting style called KC fighting technique. The style was very close quarters and aggressive, heavily focusing on direct hits to joints in the body. The style worked really well for Batman, who was generally a more aggressive fighter, especially in his early forays as a crime fighter. Unfortunately, because of the quick and frantic editing, we weren't able to see this fighting style to its full glory. When it comes to Gotham itself, Nolan's Gotham felt dirty and claustrophobic, especially the narrow section of Gotham City, which housed the majority of Gotham's underprivileged. Taking inspiration from Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, Nolan incorporated many sets built on sound stages, models and miniatures, and fully CGI cityscapes to achieve the maximum effect for his Gotham. Nolan's use of brown colors, the constant heavy downpour, the cramped and trash-filled streets, combined with the decrepit buildings, helped the more grimy sections of Gotham seem disgusting and unkept. This aesthetic for Gotham City was later abandoned in the sequels. The purpose was to amplify the effect that these films and the events within them could actually happen in our world. However, as a result, we lost an element, in my opinion, that made Begins incredibly unique from the other Batman films. Nolan made a few changes to the characters in the Batman mythos. Changes such as Joker being an uncontrollable anarchist devoid of any need for material value, such as money. His mannerisms, his appearance, and his voice were unlike any version of the Joker at the time. For a character like Harvey Dent, the only radical change he experienced was a change in his downfall into Two-Face. Characters such as Flask, Alfred, Gordon, Catwoman, Scarecrow, Ra's al Ghul, and Falcone stick pretty close to how they were portrayed in the comics, with only a few minor and small alterations. The only characters that had radical changes was Bane, Robin, and Commissioner Loeb. Bane was reinvented as an excommunicated member of the League of Shadows, who uses his raw physical strength instead of venom like in the comics. Robin was reinvented as a GCPD officer named Robin Blake, and Commissioner Loeb was race-swapped and had a change in personality. One of the smaller changes Chris Nolan made to the Batman mythos was having Bruce Wayne watch the opera Mephistopheles instead of the Mark of Zorro at the theater. Christopher Nolan is the perfect example of how the right director with the right creative vision can have a deep and profound effect on a character and its mythos. Whether that effect was good or not is up to who you ask, but you cannot deny that Chris Nolan not only redefined Batman, but the entire superhero genre as a whole. It's interesting to think that if any of those other directors got their hands on the Batman franchise, our entire perception on the character cinematically could have been entirely different.